welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I wanted to give you a rundown today of my Booktube Prize rankings. I have made 2 vlogs that detail the reading of all 6 books with more impressions and a bit more check-ins and things like that. So if you're interested in extreme detail, check those out if you haven't already. And this is for the people who are more interested in just a quick synopsis and kind of my overall impressions of why I did the rankings the way I did. So I'm not really sure if I should start at the top or start at the bottom, but I think I'll start at number 6 because that was the first book I read. So number 6 was Savage Appetites by Rachel Monroe. And I chose this one as number 6 because it just wasn't a very enjoyable reading experience for me. I found the subject matter to be really difficult to get through, very graphic descriptions of violence. And this book was about the kind of obsession with true crime that a lot of people have in North America, or maybe in the Western world. But it is very US centric. There's no other kind of examples of different cultures and or different countries and whether or not they have this experience. It's very about the United States. It's about 4 women in particular and their particular obsessions with certain areas of true crime. And it was, yeah, like I said, very graphic. And I just found that although the writing was fairly well done, there were a few parts that just didn't work for me, including the way the author wove her own experiences and her own obsessions with true crime into the story. I just didn't find them very good, very compelling, and I read it because I had to read it, and it is number 6, so there we go. Number 5 was the last book I read, and that was 5 Days Gone, The Mystery of My Mother's Disappearance, I believe is the subtitle, by Laura Cumming. This book, I'm not sure if it was supposed to be kind of a memoir. I mean, it is in essence a biography of Laura Cumming's mother, who had a really interesting and in a lot of ways devastating childhood, growing up not knowing who her true parents were, living in a very cold environment with parents who were quite strict or just lacking of love, and quite strict, and never being explained why they were making the decisions they were making. I don't think there was anything particularly, I mean, in some ways, I guess her situation was unique, but I think there's probably thousands of children who grew up in a similar way, where they weren't really sure about their true parentage, where they grew up in a home that lacked a certain level of love and compassion. And so while I think that, it was, there were parts of it that I thought were quite lovely. The descriptions of Chapel, which is the little village in Lincolnshire where they live, where Laura Cumming's mother grew up, was, some of it was really interesting. I also found a lot of it very repetitive and sentimental, just way too sentimental. I think Laura Cumming suffered in this case from just being too close and loving her mother so much that she couldn't really write something that gave a well-rounded perspective of the situation. And I can't blame her for that. I don't think there's anything wrong with loving your mother and caring about her and wishing that her childhood had been more pleasant. I think that's a very normal feeling, but I don't think that you can necessarily translate that into a book that's going to be interesting for someone to read. And for me, I just didn't find it was very interesting at all. And so for me, it was not on the level of Savage Appetites for something I didn't enjoy, but was my number 5 ranking. So from 1 to 4, these were all books that I enjoyed quite a bit. So number 4 was The Ice at the End of the World by Jon Gertner. Now, I enjoyed the first part of this book a lot. It was a great adventure story. It shares the history of people dwelling on Greenland, when they came, how long they stayed, what they endured to live in such a harsh environment, and just some wonderful stories of like really interesting characters who ventured out into a really crazy landscape for whatever reason they felt compelled to do so. So in that part, it was great. The second part of the book is more about the science and technology as it developed around studying glaciology and understanding the glacier and how that has impacted studies of climate change and studies of how climate works and how important the ice is to our daily life on Earth. So the second part was very science-based, and I am not a very science-based reader. So I found the second part to be just not as enjoyable. I found my mind wandered a bit. A lot of the details were just not as compelling or interesting to me. And so that's why I put that book at the number 4 position. Number 3 was No Visible Bruises. What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us, I think, by Rachel Louise Snyder. So I thought this book was very well written. It had, again, only focused on the United States, but, I think Snyder researched it very, very well. And as well as she could. I wish she could have included a bit of information about the LGBTQ plus couples and the violence that goes on in their community. So that's the only area that she didn't really touch. She mentions it, but she doesn't actually give us a case study based in that area. And I think in some ways a book on that would probably be a little bit different, because you're looking at just a different sector of society, kind of focusing down into another area and how that violence manifests itself. But overall, as a book, I thought that she did a wonderful job of sharing the details of gruesome and horrible things without being gratuitous, without being sensationalist. She was just telling you what you really needed to know in order to understand the facts that she was trying to convey to you. And in order for you to understand the extent of the problem, sorry about the jiggling. And in order for you to understand the extent of the problem. So it was very important to read so many important statistics and so much important information about why systems fail people, how people, are working to try to improve those systems, and then also where there still needs more improvement to be, and how challenging it is not only for victims and survivors of domestic violence to move on, but how hard it is for perpetrators of that to move on, and how the cycles of poverty and abuse continue to propel these things forward. So really important read, very well written. I can't really say that there's something necessarily wrong with it other than the LGBTQ representation. It just didn't quite hit the mark as well as number 2 and number 1. So that's why I got the number 3 spot. Number 2 is The Ungrateful Refugee by Dina Nayeri. And this story was just so compelling. I listened to this on audio, and it was narrated by the author herself. She tells her own story, and she tells the story of many other refugees and immigrants, what they've gone through, how it's affected their lives, the extent of the waiting and the extent of the trials and tribulations that they are forced to endure after deciding to flee very horrific situations in many cases, and the levels of nuance in there. So Nayeri shares a lot about herself and about her own situation, some of which I don't find, I didn't feel quite applied to the grand scheme of her theme and of her point that she was going for. And so that was my only reason for not putting it, you know, that was one of the reasons it didn't make number one for me. She just had a few areas where I felt like she lost and like kind of went off into a bit of a tangent that didn't really connect in with the bigger frame of story. But I think for her, I felt like there was kind of a catharsis in writing this book and a way to take this story and finally get it out of herself maybe and put it out there. And so in doing that, she maybe had to go into some areas that weren't necessarily as on theme as some of the others. So, but she still had such an interesting story, so many important things shared, and she was specifically looking at the immigration and refugee systems in the UK and the Netherlands and America. So those were the three areas that she was looking at. So obviously in different countries there would probably be different experiences. And so for Group G, that leaves one book at number one, and that is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This book is, you know, one of those life-changing nonfictions that everyone, I believe, in the world should read, that helps everyone understand their own place in racism and how it is perpetuated. I don't think that he could have written this book any better. It is concise, it is to the point. He also shares all of the personal information about his own life that makes every section he's writing about relevant. And so in that way, I felt like it was so well done. He takes small parts of his own experience and relays them through each section, explaining different aspects of racism, how it can be broken down, and how we need to work together as a community to change policy, and that will lead the way forward for real justice in our society. So I think overall I had 4 really great reads, really important reads that I really enjoyed, and 2 that were just, you know, not for me, but all in all, not horrible books. I wouldn't say that any of them were poorly written, or that that either of the 2 that I didn't really enjoy are not worth reading. I'm sure there's other readers that will certainly enjoy them. I'm filming this, today is March 29th, and so the results for the voting are supposed to be in tomorrow. I'm very excited to hear what books go forward and what books will be taken off the list. And I will be back once I start my second round of reading. I'm going to be judging in the fiction round this time. And so I'm very excited to share that all with you. Like I said before, if you haven't checked out my vlogs about these books in detail, if you find that any of them are particularly compelling for you, the first vlog has Savage Appetites, The Ungrateful Refugee, and How to Be an Anti-Racist in it. And the second vlog has No Visible Bruises, 5 Days Gone, and The Ice at the End of the World. So thank you very much for watching, and I will be back again with some more Booktube Prize content in a few months, and I hope you're having a wonderful day.